Okay, so we're now at this stage here, it's a little bit later, and I've sewn the outer of our cape too, and we've got the lining. What we're going to do now is take one at a time, and we're going to attach the lining to the hood lining to the main body of the cape. So I've still got white thread in my machine from sewing the outer, so I'm going to work on that one first. And what we need to do here is we should have a set, if we put the two seams together there, we should have had a little notch on the back there, which I hadn't put in mine, but there's a notch at the centre back, so we can just pop that notch in, and that's going to match up straight on top of the seam of the hood, the centre one that goes from right from the centre front all the way round the centre back. So let's put a pin in there just to anchor that point. I'm going to sew it probably from the hood side because I want to keep it all nice and flat. The next point I'm then going to match is come round here, and we should be able to match, this will work, these front edges here. Now mine feels like it's slightly off, so maybe my 1 centimetre seam allowance isn't quite as hot as I thought it was. Yeah, we can get a notch there. Right, so this is a great way that now to show you what to do with the points if it doesn't match. So I can see from here, if I match the start at the front edge of my hood with the front edge of my cape and match that point there, and I've matched the centre back, so that seam there that runs down the centre back of the head of the cape is now matched up with the halfway point between the two shoulder seams. I just put those together straight on top of each other and then marked the centre point of those. I can see that I've got some excess fabric here and that should be lying flat. So what I'm going to do now on my hood is I am just going to take on this bottom edge here a slightly bigger seam allowance, and what that will mean is that when I then pop that together on there, it will then sit neatly. So keeping our seam allowances open. So let's just see how much we need to do that by. So that's all nice and flat, so let's pin that bit together because that bit is working nicely. Oh, give your pin a twist if it doesn't want to go through. It's because of the seam allowances. There we go. And then I'm going to work from my hood side, from the centre back side, towards that shoulder seam as well. And see why that is not matching. Now Sarah does say in the book that the shoulder seams don't match up perfectly because of the bulk that would be there with all those seams going together, especially by the time we put the lining together with it all. So I can see that I need to have a little bit more, probably about, can't be half a centimetre more, but just a few millimetres more, and that will then make that sit nice and neatly for then going round the back of her neck. So I'm just going to go off and just take these pins out here. I'm going to keep it attached at the centre back and the centre front because I know those points are right. And I'm just going to move the back of the cape out of the way, flatten out my seam allowance, and then I'm just going to now just so that's my original sewing line just there. I'm going to come in a little bit here and just sew down a little bit further down here and then join into this line here. So I'm just taking a little wedge out, and that will just take in that excess seam allowance, and that's all we need to do. It just means that it's just not matched up perfectly, and perhaps my seam allowance has been slightly off. It can happen to any of us, especially when you're doing so many seams. You only need to be a millimetre out on each one, and before you know it, you're half a centimetre out. But that's what I'm going to do, just go down there and just tidy that along there. Okay, and then I'll come back to you. So I've just sewn this little wedge out, which hopefully you might be able to see. So there's the original line of stitch in there, and I've just come in a couple of millimetres and done a line here, and it just meets into this line here. Hopefully you can see that. It hopefully makes sense as well if you can't. All I'm going to do then is what I've done is I have just tested it first by just pulling out the sides, because remember we've got the front attached here and the centre back attached there, and I've just pulled it apart and just made sure that that's now going to lie flat, and it is. So all I'm going to do now is go back and undo the original stitches that I did using my quick unpick, or your seam ripper, depends which part of the world you live in as to what you call it, up to the point where those two lines cross. I'm just leaving a stitch just one side of that, and then just move that tailor's tack out the way thread just whilst we just undo the rest of this, because that will then allow this seam to lie flat again. Oh, if that one will come out, I think it will. So that now should pull open a little bit more. If there's any little stitches left, just break through those. That's it, just get those out of the way. Don't want any threads in our work if we can help it. Oops, that's it, and that's the backing thread, so we can just break that one off. And because this row of stitching has crossed over the other one, we shouldn't need to tie that off at all. And then what we can do now is open that out, line it all up, and then we can then put our pins back in again. And I'm putting my pins in through my hood because I'm going to sew it through from that direction, because I think that'll be the most difficult fabric to try and match. Try and keep your seam allowances flat if you can. So that's got one half there, all just nice and neat. Now there's a chance we might have to do the same on the other side, but that's okay, it's not a hassle. So I'm just going, so we've got the centre back pinned already, so let's now just pin the edge of the hood and the edge of the centre front together. Make sure those raw edges are together. It's a bit difficult because when you've got a fabric like corduroy or velvet, it doesn't slide against itself. And again, yeah, this one's going to be slightly too big as well. So I'm going to do what I did before. I'm just going to put in a pin just to hold that against the hood again as far as I can towards this seam here. And this is the one that I'm altering. I'm altering this side seam here. Could take it all to the back and end to the centre back, but I just thought it was just nicer if it just on mine we just went to this seam here. So again, open this out and make sure that all lies flat, and that's going to give you some idea then of how much we need to take it in by. So again, just pinch it just to see where you need to do it, and it's literally just the same on both sides. Okay, so just take out that pin just there, and then just pull the hood away from the body of the fabric. Careful not to stab myself, as I just have done. Seam allowances are flat, and I'm just going to come in slightly and just do a little bit of a wedge. A couple of stitches forward and back there, and then you just take it up to match the original stitches. As I say, it just takes out that little excess, and sometimes you do just get it on these types of garments. Just test it again. Yes, that's going to lie flat, so now I'll take out my original stitches. I always do that little test first, because sometimes you undo your stitches, so you undo your stitches and then it doesn't lie flat anyway, and you've not got your original mark then to work with. So just taking those out, and then we'll get this flat against itself, and then we'll be able to lie that down. So you can just finger press this one open for now, because we've got it pinned and I don't want to upset all of those pins. And making sure we keep our seam allowances open. I'm just going to pin that together through all those layers. It's quite thick, so just take your time. And now we're just going to sew that with 1/4 inch seam allowance around this neck edge. We're just going to try and make sure that take our time. There's definitely somewhere to have your needle in your work to pivot, because you've got quite a tight curve. We're going to start off here and then manipulate the fabric as we go. So we're just doing 1/4 inch seam allowance here, so it's not much. Take my pin out once I've got my foot holding it down, and put my needle down into the work, holding onto my threads. And I'm literally feeling with my fingers as we go forward to make sure that we've not got any puckers under there. So front, forward and back, needle in the work, and then literally just going to just keep lifting the cape up, and as I sew forward, I'm just trying to make sure that we've got that nice and flat as we can get it under there. Just keep moving your cape around, because that will help it all lie flat. And again, just lift your presser foot up and move it round if you need to. And if your seam allowances flip up, you can just lift up your presser foot and just move those down. Right, we're halfway round, folks. Keep your fingers crossed. nice and steady because we've got some tight curves around here to try and get around. And some seam allowances. That front pin's come out, isn't it? Okay. Can't see with my big fat hands in the way, can you? Sorry. Hopefully you get the gist of what I'm trying to do. And this front little bit is flat, isn't it? So that pin's just come undone. So just make sure that's all nice and flat under there. And just reverse stitch at the end. Right, keep your fingers crossed. Let's have a look and see. Oh, well, I did leave a pin in. Must have sewn over that pin. Didn't see that one. Okay. So that's all smooth. That's all smooth. That's all smooth. Do you know what? By Jove, we've done it. Yep, happy with that. That's all smooth all the way through. So we've now got a cape and we've got a hood attached to it. So the next thing that we can do, I don't think we have to snip into that neckline because I think it's just going to go straight into the same part of the coat anyway. So because normally on a curve like this you'd put some little snips in, and we can just do that if we wanted to, just to help it just lie flat. We're just going through the seam allowance up to but not through the stitches, and like we did before I'm just going to trim off any little bits of the seam allowance that I can at a diagonal to that cut edge, because that will help cut down on bulk as well where we can. There isn't many places where we can do it, but where we can we will. Okay, oh look, you see, just where we've finished, that's just folded over underneath there, so I'll just undo that. So although it was right on the hood side, it's just folded under here, so I'm just going to take that stitch out just there and just ease these stitches, get my tailor's tack out of the way because that's for our hook and eye. Just ease these stitches back, being very careful not to put a hole in the sewing. It just got caught back, hadn't it? Trying to get just one thread at a time so that'll lie nice and flat. Just put it back in my machine. As I said, I've said to you before, I think, and if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that it's not that we don't ever go wrong, it's about just knowing how to put it right so that nobody else knows that we've gone wrong. And generally we tell people anyway. I say, oh yes, it's a beautiful dress, and then we say, oh yes, but I went wrong here and I went wrong there. I don't know why we do that. But there we go, it's all sewn down now, so that's all nice and neat. So now we're going to do the same with the hood. So let's have a go and see how we get on, not with the hood, with the lining. So now let's have a look and see how we get on here. So first of all, I'm going to mark that centre back notch, which I forgot to mark on mine before. So I just put these two seams together. And then I can just, where the fold is, I can just put a little snip in, just so there's that centre back little notch just there. And that lines up with the centre back hood seam. I'm putting right sides together, of course. Make sure that seam allowance is open, and I'm going to pin from the hood side. And then we're going to come round to the front and we're going to match up the front of our hood. And I think this one's going to be a little bit loose as well. So there must be something, I might just take that off on one of my little pattern pieces so that it's going to be, oh no, this one's alright actually. Yep, no, this one's going to be okay. So let's come down to this part here. So match up this, so we've got a flat bit for the front of the hood. The shoulder seams don't necessarily match on top of each other. They're just slightly off centre. That's just, as Sarah says in the book, that's just to reduce down on the bulk at that point, so they're not lying directly on top of each other. And we've already got the centre back mark, so we're going to come to this other edge here now and match up the front of the hood with the front of the coat front, the cape front. And then again we're now going to open out our seam allowances, which should already be open anyway, and pin it together so that it can't move on us. Okay, and that one's there. Just open out. So a little bit fiddly this pinning, so take your time and just be patient with yourself. Just make sure that's matching on the back there, and it should lie fairly flat. I've got a little bit of a pucker just there possibly. So I'm going to take out this pin, and I'm just literally going to just take in the barest minimum just on this seam, and I just need to change my threads out as well. This is the only trouble with working with contrasting colours, is that sometimes it's good because obviously you know, I mean, if you've got coordinating colours then you might be fine to use one thread to do the whole lot, but for this one I am using red for the lining and then white for the outer. So but you'll be surprised how quickly you get at just threading, and the little needle threader that I've got on my machine is an absolute star. I certainly wouldn't buy a machine without a needle threader now, which is this bit that comes down here, and it just puts a little hook through the eye of the needle and it pulls the thread through for you. So I wouldn't be without that now. That is definitely one of the top things that I like. Okay, literally just a millimetre. Because of course whatever we take it in will be doubled, because we're taking it in on the 2 pieces of fabric. So I've literally just taken in that small amount there, but that's going to make all the difference for this now sitting together properly. Just take out a couple of these threads so that it can sit flat. And again, this is going to, for some people, is going to go into the world of being pedantic, but if it's the difference between just doing that little seam, oh, careful, don't want to poke through the fabric, doing that little seam and it lying flat or potentially getting a pucker, then I'm always going to take that little seam and hopefully we avoid the pucker. Right, happy with that now. So let's put this underneath here. I've got the cape side down and the hood side up. Make sure those are lined on together properly, and it's 1/4 inch seam allowance. Needle in my work just to anchor it before I start taking the pins out. I'm just going to manipulate this fabric and just make sure that it's as flat as it can be as we go around. Oops. And say just take your time, and literally if you can only do a couple of centimetres in front of your needle, just do a couple of centimetres, then just stop and just rearrange. Having the patience to do that will save you a lot of time in unpicking later if you need to, especially on these small garments. They're just so tiny. And then tiny makes fiddly, so you know it's what we've chosen to work with, isn't it? Oops, I have almost gone over a bin, I think. Whoops. I do try not to, but sometimes they hide in the folds. Onto this one, it should be fairly straight. Just want it to just curve round slightly. That's it. Needle out, and let's cut through our threads. Okay, move that bobbin out of the way. Let's have a little look and see. So no puckers there, All clear there, all clear there. Yeah, we've done it, we've done it. So I'm just going to put those couple of snips just in this neck edge now, just at right angles to the stitch line, and it just releases just some of that fabric just to be able to be using it. Just make sure you don't have anything folded underneath and snip through, because it's so easy to do that and you'll kick yourself. And then we're just going to now just go through and just take out those corners on those seam allowances. Oops. Just so that they can lie as flat as possible. Careful not to take off the ends of our tailor's tacks, although some of them we've finished with now, I think. Back on the other side here. Seam allowance there is folded over. Just snip it off as best as I can. If they can lie flat, but sometimes you just can't see what you're working with. I wouldn't go back and change that. I just snipped it off as close as I can do to the stitches and take off as much of the excess as possible. Sometimes you can pull the threads through depending on the fabric and just get it to lie flat that way, but okay. So congratulate yourself at this stage, because let me get rid of these bits off my work surface for all those people who don't like all of that. I have got a bin down the side there. I'm not just pushing it off the edge of my table, honestly, onto the floor. So we now have our outer with our hood attached, and we have our lining with our hood attached. So at this point now, we now need to decide if we're using a trim or not, because the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be attaching the trim. So when you're working with trim on a garment like this, it's a bit like the lace on the bottom of Daisy's twirling dress. You'll always end up using more than you think you're going to need. I think it's 1.5 meters that Sarah says that you need for doing this, and I've got slightly more than that. Now what I'm going to do is work out the back of my centre back first, and I'm going to join my trim at my centre back, I think. Another place to join it would be at one of the side seams as well. You don't want to join it on a front corner, because you don't want it to be too obvious where you're actually starting to join this up. So what I'm going to do now is take this lining here, this trim here, and when we sew this on, I'm going to just overlap it slightly, and we want to sew it so that the trim is just on the raw edge of the fabric, and that the pom-poms are just sticking inside. And again, we've got to be careful, because this is a bias edge. This one round the corner is a bias edge, and if we're not careful, if we're too rough with it, we will stretch it. So just try not to stretch your trim too much. And again, you could use a rick-rack trim if you wanted. You could use a frill of fabric if you wanted. You could use lace. That would look nice too. I think if you've got any faux fur, I think I'd probably sew that on at the end afterwards, I think, rather than sew it in between these two now, because I think you'd lose too much of it in there. But again, it's all personal preference. So just going to tack this on here. So we're just literally going to go all the way around the edge of the cape. And the other thing to do is just fold it back on itself. Just make sure at this stage, before you go too far, that you like the effect as well. I do. I think the colour mat is not quite right, because that's cream and this is white, but I think I can get away with it, so I'm going to carry on. If you didn't like it at this stage, then before you've sewn it all on and sewn it all together, you can make your adjustments, can't you? So I'm just literally just matching the trim. Now when you come to a corner, let's put a pin close to the corner so we can work with the corner. Oops, come on, pin. So what we need to do then is we're needing to turn the corner and start to go up this side here. But that can get quite bulky and quite messy. So the idea is that you work out where your corner is going to be, and you just snip through a little bit and put a little cut in that trim, not all the way through, just enough to allow you to turn the corner and for it to lie flat. and then we start to go in the opposite in the next direction. It's not the opposite direction, is it? It's just in the carrying on in that direction. So you don't need to watch me pin all of this all the way round, but hopefully that was enough, because the rest of it should be fine. If you come across any seam allowances like the one on the hood, I would press the seam allowance for the hood down to the bottom of the cape, but all of these seam allowances here around the cape, I'm going to press open. So you're only putting this onto the outer of your main fabric, and you're trying just to make it lie flat so it doesn't pucker it all up as well. And then once we've got all the way round, then I'm going to go round and just do a tacking stitch, just so put my stitch length up high, probably onto a 3.5 or a 4, and I'm literally just going to stitch this just right on in the centre of this tape and just stitch it down. Now what you might find best, and Sarah mentions this in the book, is, let me just find my zipper foot. So if you use a zip foot, which is like this, or if you've got one that looks like that, you can use that as well. See both those, yeah. Because this will allow you to get close to the trim and the needle close without having the original presser foot, because if you try and sew with this presser foot, you're going to struggle to get your needle close enough without knocking all of these pom-poms. And so if you use a zip foot like this, you can get so much closer before you then start to hit your pom-poms. So that's why Sarah's saying to use a zipper foot. They can look different to that. I haven't got those are the two I've got. This one is an adjustable one, so I use this one for piping, and it's really good. But you undo the screw, and then you can move the foot either side of your shank for your needle, and that works quite nicely. So I do like that one. But we'll do what Sarah says, and we'll use our zipper foot, and that will help us then sew the trim on. So, So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to just keep that one. I always keep my presser feet together so that I don't lose them. Take away tub again, and then I've just labelled it up. I really like to use those. Oh, and the other thing that you might not know is that you've got 2 bars here, and that separator in the middle. So your presser foot will click onto that side or that side, depending on which side you're wanting to sew. So on this one, we're going to be sewing on this left side, so I'm going to use this one here. And you just lower your presser foot onto it, and then it lifts it up. It's just attached really easily like that. So hopefully you've used your different feet before, but if not, then it's a good way of having a practice, isn't it? Right, so I'm going to pin this, and then I'll come back to you when I'm tacking, and then you can watch me do the tacking. I've just got back to the beginning again, and what I wanted to just say is that what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move that piece of tape out of the way, and I'll probably end up cutting that little pom-pom off, but I'll probably leave the threads on there because I don't want to unravel that, but take that little pom-pom off the end just to give us a bit of tape to follow. I've got the tape going all the way up to the edge pretty much. Just put a pin in there just to hold that there. So I've just done a little right angle with that one, folded it back on itself so that it's out, poking out. And then with this one, we want that pom-pom to stay so that it keeps the continuity, we don't lose the spacing. So the pom-pom after that, after the one where it's crossed over, that's where I'm going to snip. So I'm going to take off that pom-pom here as well. And then just snip that just after. Because again, we're going to get a little crossover in the pom-poms just there. Oops. So can you see how I've just folded one over the other? And then if you just practice it by just turning it around the right way, we've kept the spacing of the pom-poms, and hopefully it'll turn into a bit of an invisible join. Now what we've also got to remember is that we've got these little, on my pom-poms, yours might not have it, but I've got these little loops in between here, which is where this thread has been jumped, and I need to go quite close to my pom-poms when I'm sewing in order that I don't get that little bit of thread showing. Can you see there's a little bit of, let's use this, there's a little bit of thread that's just kind of loose there. that's part of the braid. I'll show you on here as well, look. So it's that little bit there that could sit proud if I want to. So when I'm sewing this down, I'm going to tack through here first off, but then when I'm sewing them down, I'm going to then do it nice and slowly, but probably try and go across the actual edge of the pom-pom strings that are holding the pom-poms on, so that that will then work. This is my theory. We work with theory and then hopefully things go right. I'm going to save those as the pom-pom. Right, okay. So I'm going to actually put in white thread, because I think when I sew this all together I'm going to use white thread, because I think the white thread will be less noticeable. So let me just flick this thread back over again. This is what I say to you about using, oops, dropping things everywhere, aren't I? I need a good tidy up, I think. But I really wanted to get these videos out because I thought if anybody's wanting to make this little cape for a Christmas present, for a Christmas outfit, then I thought some of you might feel it's a little bit complicated, or you might have tried it and got in a bit of a muddle, because with those pattern pieces it's quite easy to get into a bit of a muddle. I had to look at it twice, and I kind of know what I'm doing generally, but yeah, just getting that orientation and finding those match points can be a little bit daunting. So let's just thread this up quickly. Sorry that you're having to watch me do this, but I could have stopped and started the video, but we're halfway there already. Just be careful when you drop your needle down that I didn't do it then, but you need to offer it up slowly to make sure it's actually going to hit the hole in your machine, in your presser foot. That's the word I wanted. I'm going to start in this centre back as well, because it's a nice easy place to start. And now we've got to just work out where we actually want to stitch. Now I'm going to move my needle to the left because I want to hold these out the way, but I want to stitch in the middle, and if I'm not careful, the edge of my presser foot here on the zipper foot is actually going to catch on the pom-poms, and I want those all to stand out straight and not get in the way. So I'm just going to move my needle. It's not wanting to at the moment. Why is that not moving? Because my presser foot's down, that's why. Yeah, that should do. Yeah, okay. So I've just moved that round. So I'm holding on to my threads. I've got a needle in here, pin in there, so I'm just trying to take that one out, but that's just holding them together. Hopefully you can see what I'm going to be doing here. Okay, so a couple of stitches. Needle in my work, so just hold it down and then start. Now the zipper foot doesn't have a lot of grip underneath it, especially over that first bit, so you might need to use the point of your quick unpick just to hold it. Ooh, it's not liking it, folks. Hold on 1 second. Needle up. This might happen to you as well, so that's why I'm not stopping the camera. Because we're right on that edge. There's not a lot for the feed dogs to hold on to. I'm going to take my needle. I didn't take my stitch length up. That might help as well. And just keeping the tape on the edge. That's better. See how it doesn't want to grip it though. Right. I'm going to suggest that I do this by hand, because I think when we actually do the main bit of sewing, it's going to be further in. So what I'm going to do is just thread up my needle with this red thread so you can see what I'm doing. And stitch. Some things we just have to do by hand. It doesn't actually take that much longer in the scheme of things, because by the time you've stopped and started and moved your pins and adjusted your speed and what have you, then sometimes you can just have hand sewn it just as quickly. So let's just thread that needle. Okay, and it might be that you're doing this by hand anyway. Nice big tacking stitches, and we'll be able to take these out when we're, oops, oh, thread's going to catch on the pom-poms. Hold on 1 second, there we go. Just keep your thread out the way of your pom-poms, folks. Sounds like something from a comedy sketch, that does, doesn't it? Right, so this braid on this pom-pom thread, pom-pom trim, is not liking the needle going through, so that's part of the problem. Right, I'm not going to make you sit and watch this. You know how to tack trim onto pom-pom, so literally that's all I'm doing with that red. And then when we sew it, I'm going to sew it much closer to here, because then when I fold that over, we want a nice edge, and we're going to be sewing it with the edge of the, when we've tacked all this on, we're going to then be matching up the back of the cape and sewing it all at the same time. And then when we sew it, push it through, it's going to then sandwich it in between the two. So for now, I'll just get on and just tack this on, and I'll come back to you when I'm actually doing the matching the front, the lining and the main cape together. Okay, so this is where we're at the moment. I've just tacked the thread, the trim all the way through, and just remember to have your trim actually pointing in towards your garment, because we'll turn it round again in the next stage. But what we're going to do now is take our lining fabric and we're going to line it up on the back of the garment. Now the first thing I'm going to do is locate these sides, the first seam after the back, and we're going to line that up with the first seam after the back here, and make sure that those line up on top. And then I'm just going to pin it. And then again, this is our second match point on the other side. So I'm just lining that up and just pinning it. If you just have to keep just poking your pom-poms back into your garment now. We're just going to be dodging those whilst we're sewing. The next thing I'm going to do is just match up that centre half. I've got a fold line here where I've had my garment folded before, my fabric folded before, and line that up on that point there. And because this is a bias edge, because it can stretch, we've just got to be aware when we're pinning this that we just take our time and we don't pin it too rigorously, and that we just keep pushing those pom-poms straight in flat towards the garment. And you can feel them with your fingers, so you can kind of feel that they're going in the right direction and that you're not pinning. What you don't want to do is have one of your pom-poms poking out like that, because otherwise it's not going to be shown on the right side of your garment when you turn it round, and that it's not actually sitting on that seam just there, because we don't want to sew over it. So just by poking it in and feeling with your fingers, fingernails or your fingers, that you've got all of those pom-poms down this side here, and that when you sew, you're going to be sewing just on your fabric, then you should be okay. And again here, so just try and make it sure it's lying nice and flat. And this is the easy bit, because this is just two pattern pieces that we made sure were the same size before we started sewing them, if you remember, in the early stages of the video. Just make sure your raw edges match as well, because that'll affect the fit of the two pieces together. And just go round, and we're just making sure we're just pinning those out the way. Then I'm going to move around to this next bit here, and we're going to make sure that we've got that seam there pinned on top of each other. Oops, don't pin there. Something's squeaking, I'm not quite sure, on my table. And again, just making sure that those pom-poms are all sticking down where they should be. The trim doesn't like having pins put through it. And then round again to the front. Now, I've got a little bit excess here. I'm not going to worry too much at the moment at the point. Again, that could just be that seam allowance issue. But we'll talk about that if we need to go back and change anything. But just for now, I'm just going to pin those. Okay, and then I'm just going to go across to the other side of this, kind of doing the skirt, if you like, of the cape. Matching up that seam allowance there, making sure that's not spot on, and it is. Oops. And then we can go back and just put another pin in here. So pins are our friends here, or you can use the clips, can't you? These as well work well when you've got lots of clips. So these work well, and if you're going round, you can just clip that on the edge like that. Oh, and this one matches up perfectly, look. I might go back and just check that one then. Again, if you're working with young children, then these are really good. I mean, this probably isn't a garment for a young child to make, to be fair, because it is fairly technical, I think. Right. Oh, don't put my pin in my mouth because I can't speak to you then, can I? So that seam allowance had jumped forward slightly, so that was accounting for some of the difference in the distance. Again, it's just a bit of a fiddle just to get it to sit absolutely right, but it's worth doing to make sure that you've got it right. So just keep working around the garment, just like this, matching up as much as you can. Remembering that a lot of these edges are bias edges, so they will stretch slightly. Okay, so we've got those bits matched up. So the next bit I want to match up now is this neck edge. Now I'm going to push all of the seam allowances for the hood and the body down in towards the body. So again, you can put a clip on or a pin if you want to there. And then when we've got that straight, now we can match this edge down here. I'm going to start from the top edge of the outfit here. Just pulling those so that they sit straight together, because I think the tacking stitches have just pulled it in slightly. If I need to lose any off the corner there just to make it sit, I will do, because I'm not too bothered about that little corner just there that's just showing proud, because we can just lose that as long as it's all going to sit flat when we turn it round the right way. And I probably won't snip that off until I've actually turned it the right way round, the garment round the right way round, just to make sure that it's all as it should be first. The other thing that we do need to leave, oh, I know what we've not left. We've not left an opening, have we, for turning it round the right way. Who's been shouting at me about that? Somebody might have been, because that would have reminded me. I think Sarah said to leave a gap in the lining, didn't she? I might leave a gap where the edge of trim is, and that will just work just as well. So again on here we're going to match up the centre of the hood. Make sure our seam allowances are flat, because that'll add to make it bulky if it's not. Oh, that's that pin, isn't it? Bent pin. And then just match down the sides of the hood. Now we might have to just put a little bit of pressure on the sides of the fabric as we're sewing, just to make sure that they stay flat, but I'll show you how to do that as we're sewing. I wonder if you could put it through the, you could probably put it through the armhole actually, couldn't you? Right, I'll go back and just correct it myself in a second, hold on. A couple of pins left, that was all. Right, so the thing that I'm muttering to myself is that I've not left a gap in the lining fabric here in order to turn the garment round. Sarah says in the book to leave, I think, a couple of inches free, but I think I'm going to be able to pull mine through here if I'm careful, because we reinforce that side, and I might even do it from this side so that it's straight, because that's not far off a couple of inches, and I think that'll give us enough. So I'm not going to, so I haven't followed the instructions. I've been a bit maverick, but if you want to go back and just undo a couple of inches on a side seam along here so that you can turn it through, you can do. We'll see how I get on with turning it through this armhole and whether that works or not. I might live to regret it, but we're going to try it and see how we get on. So the next thing that we need to be aware of now is that we are going to be sewing the lining and through the fabric. So we've got to just, I'm going to sew it from the lining side because that's where I've pinned, and we just need to make sure that as we go along we're just pushing those pom-poms in towards the centre of the garment so that they're not getting under the bottom of the presser foot. I'm going to start here and I'm going to sew around. The other thing that the zipper foot can have a tendency to do is make your fabric bunch up. So just take your time, and if you see any bunching, stop, lift your presser foot and release the pressure underneath, and then let it carry on. So I'll show you what I mean when we're starting to sew it, because I think it'll make more sense when I'm actually doing it. So I need to move my needle back again because it's too far across at the moment. Hopefully those pom-poms are small enough to go underneath the presser foot. I'm going to get you in a better position so that you can see. Hold on 1 second. Okay. And I'm going to take my stitch length down now to, I'm not going to go to a 2.2, I'm going to take it down to a 3, I think. Because I think we still need to have it being a little bit wider than normal, because I think this presser foot is going to struggle otherwise, just taking such small bites. This is also somewhere where I'm going to be using my awl as well. So you've now spoken about this before. It's an awl, AWL, and it just means that we can get right in close without fear of losing our fingers with that, or stabbing our fingers with the presser foot. And I'm going to turn my speed down on my machine as well, so we're going nice and slow. Okay, so let's just take this nice and steady and see how we get on. So where's those threads first? Let's make sure that our presser foot isn't going, our needle isn't going to catch. No, it isn't, that's fine. So I've got hold of my threads, a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back. Get ourselves started off first. Okay. Needle in our work as well, because we're going to be manipulating our work. And now we're just going to, I'm just feeling that, make sure those are around. I'm going to use the edge of the presser foot there on the edge of the fabric as much as I can, nice and slow, literally few stitches at a time. Then just make sure that hold the fabric, make sure all the pom-poms are out of the way and round a little bit more. A thread that's just flicked forward. That's it. Just make sure your pom-poms are out of the way. A few more stitches forward. And we're just following that curve round as well. I'm using the awl just to hold the fabric down. So hopefully you can see. Sometimes I can't tell what you're seeing until I actually start to edit it, and I do try and check as I go along, but apologies if my big hands are in the way. I'm trying to get the best result possible so that you want to watch the video and you think I know what I'm talking about. I'm just lifting that foot up a bit because I think one of the pom-poms just feels a little bit close to the edge. I'm going to take a little peek with my finger and just see if we can coax it out the way. Okay. More stitches, pin out. Make sure those pom-poms are as far up as I can. So it's a slow process. I'm doing this in real time, just so that you can see that we just have to just really take our time with this and just make sure that everything's where we want it to be. There are things that we can do if it's not when we come back, and I'll show you what we can do if we catch any of these pom-poms. One of the first things I'll be doing is checking to see if I have or not. I was just going to start and turn that seam allowance up, so just lift up my presser foot, smooth it back down again, and then we can carry on. The other thing that when you're sewing trim on like this, you've got to choose a point at which you're sewing, and then you've got to be consistent from that point onwards, because if you start to be wavy with your sewing, you'll have 1/4 of an inch showing in one part of your trim in one place and 1/2 inch showing in another. You can see how the fabric's all starting to lift underneath the presser foot, so I'm just going to lift that up and just pull the bottom fabric forward a little bit, and it'll just release some of that pressure. I'll put my presser foot down here. So just feeling for around where that corner is, because this lining fabric is slightly proud of it. So just feeling for those pom-poms, and just use your awl if you need to, just to push them in out of the way. We just turn the corner by lifting the presser foot. I just did it quickly, didn't I? Sorry, I didn't show you. Lifting the presser foot up, and then we're just sewing now up this side here. Just lift that presser foot if you think you need it, and just release it. Oops, it dropped out. So seam allowances going down into the, oh, where's that pin gone? There it is. Pins get buried sometimes, don't they, when you're trying to do this kind of sewing. So seam allowances going down for the hood. Again, doesn't like the zipper foot, doesn't like the bulk of seam allowances very much. So just hold on to it gently at the back. Little pull if you have to, just gently, not a tug, just a gentle bit of pressure, and then it should just release it through, so you can just carry on stitching. Anybody else holding their breath like me while I'm doing this? Maybe there's one or two of you. Sometimes you can just see the bumps of the pom-poms, and you can just see where you're going. So again, because we're on the hood and we're on a curve, just got to manipulate that fabric just to keep rolling it forward towards you. Getting stuck on that seam allowance, lift the presser foot and it should just help. There we go. Want a nice clean edge on this hood, don't we? But I can see that it's starting to pull this fabric slightly, so just need to make sure that don't want any puckers, but we need to try and ease some of that fabric in under the presser foot as we're going, just so that we're not off centre with our seam allowances. Take the clip out, just give it a little bit of pressure on that. It should lie flat for you. Oh, that was a squeaky presser foot, wasn't it? Going down to this corner again, so we know this corner might go a little bit proud with the extra fabric in it. If you've seen enough of me doing this, then just fast forward the video. If you're finding it a bit tedious, just fast forward it to the next bit. I'm going to turn the corner though. There's another stitch maybe, and then lift up the presser foot to turn the corner. And you can see the lining is just going slightly proud. Just try and keep it as best as you can towards the shape. But what it means is there's more give in this fabric than there is in the other fabric. So this is stretching slightly as we're sewing it, whereas the corduroy is staying fairly flat. And so long as we've not got any puckers in the fabric, then I'll stick with it. If we get any puckers, then we'll release those. We're nearly back to the beginning, folks. We're getting there. So here the fabric's just pulled a little bit, so I'm just going to pull it down a little bit and make sure the pom-poms don't come to, and then hold it with my awl again while the machine goes over. This presser foot does not like seam allowances. We're nearly there. The other thing that we're trying to do as well is not have a pucker at the back here, so just keep your pressure to keep that nice and smooth so it doesn't start to ruckle up towards the end here. Hopefully we'll do okay. Just take nice and steady. Fingers crossed. Just poke those pom-poms out the way if you need to. few stitches back where we started and take our threads. Right, we can breathe. Okay. So now the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So now we're just checking round all of our stitches to make sure that we've not got any puckers on the fabric. On this side first. That's all good, happy with all of that. And now on this side, because obviously we could have a pucker on one side but not on the other. So far so good. Oh, the little seam allowance has just started to twist there, but we can flatten that out a bit. And then along here. Now, if your lining didn't fit when you were matching it up, remember what I did about the seam on the neck edge? Do the same again on the side seams, or choose, say like here on this back seam, just choose one seam on the both sides and try and spread it out so that you can take it in either on the lining or on your main fabric, just so that you can get round it in you know, in this one go like we have done. And you can see here it's slightly proud. Now I'm not going to snip that off until I've tried turning it round the other way and making sure that that front is lying flat once I've turned it, because if not I might have to undo some of these stitches and then try and do a bit of manipulation in order to get that bit to lie flat. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to take this and I'm going to very carefully, because I'm not supposed to be pushing it through this hole, I'm supposed to be pushing it through a 2-inch hole that we've had previously made, but if we're gentle we might be able to do it. And I'm choosing this fabric because I think that the corduroy is more robust and less stretchy than the lining fabric, and the lining fabric could stretch and cause a problem. So just be nice and gentle with turning it round, because there's a chance we might have to turn it back again if it's not all sitting nicely. So here we've got the hood, so let's just pull it through nice and easily. Again, we're not tugging, we're just putting pressure on it and it should just all start to pull through. The other thing that we can do is we can actually push fabric up inside it as well, inside that opening. That can sometimes control it a little bit better. In actual fact that has worked well, I think. We'll see when we've got it all turned out. So now we're going to pull the hood out and through. Going to pull out this side seam here. And next thing we're on pom-pom check to make sure that we've not lost any of our pom-poms and that they're all nice and evenly spaced. So we can just pull on the pom-poms, just pull that corner out. So literally just reinstating these edges here. One or two just shifted slightly with the spacing, haven't they? But we might be able to just tug those into place gently. We've got a big gap between those two, haven't we? Oh, that's it. Sometimes they just need a bit of just pull in and they just seem to come through. Okay, I'm talking to myself, and sorry, I hope I didn't mumble too much there. Basically, all I'm doing is just trying to make sure that this is flat, and because I'm doing it live on camera then, well, that one's got caught. Right, okay, we have got a pom-pom that's got caught, so we're going to, I'll show you how to remedy that. But the rest look pretty good. The hood sits inside the hood properly, and that's where the little ears are going to come through. I'm going to do something with those in a minute. When we've finished, there's a hole for an ear there and a hole for an ear just there, both in our lining and in our main fabric. And I think that's sitting together really quite nicely. We're going to just sort those side slits out in a minute or two as well. They should line up, and they pretty much do. This is where the tacking would have helped with those, just to get them lying flat, but we can match those up and make those lie nice and flat. Right, okay, so where's our pom-pom then that we've decapitated? There, right, okay. So in order to mark this, you can either put a pin or I'm just going to put a clip on it so I know where the area is that I need to work with. When I turn this round, I'm not going to turn the whole thing round, I'm just going to turn through enough that I can work with it. So I'm going to start with the corner first, just because we need to have it nice and flat so we can see what we're working with. And then I'm going to pull this bit through here just gently, just until we get a piece we can actually work on. Now we know where the clip is there, so now that's done its job, so I know which bit I'm looking at, so I'm going to take that clip out and probably just pop it, oops, on top here just for now. I think it's there actually. And then what I'm going to do now is take my quick unpick, let's go this side because you'll be able to see the stitches better. So feel with your fingers where you think the one that is caught, undo your stitches, just a few either side, just so that we can play around with that to make sure that it's going to sit straight. Being careful not to pick any threads up of our lining fabric. We've done so well so far. I want to keep it all together. And then what I'm going to do now is just use my awl and just tuck that pom-pom back in and away from that seam edge, and use my fingernails as well. Just make sure that we've got a decent run then of pom-poms. Yes, that feels much better. All I'm going to do now is just put that back into under my machine again, do a couple of stitches to start and stop where we were originally, just a few stitches back from the start. So this is the bit that we've undone just there, that inch or so. So I'm just going to keep my pom-poms out of the way. I'm just going over my stitches where I was before, a couple of stitches and back. That just anchors the thread to make sure it not ever going to come undone. And now I'm just going to stitch forward, just being careful. There's my awl, so my fingers are out of the way. Stitch forward now and close this gap, but making sure that all of those pom-poms are just sitting back. So just stop where you need to and just manipulate your fabric so you're nice and flat. And then just go backwards and forwards on your threads again, just to make sure that you've rejoined that nicely. So let's have a look. So yeah, so there, rejoin my fabric there and there. So now gently, and just push this through and just see if we've released that pom-pom, and we have. Cut these threads off. Don't need those. Oops, threads everywhere. Okay. So I think that I'm happy with that. The other thing that you can also check for as well is just checking how much of the trim, you know, I said about those loops on the trim, so I didn't want any of those to show. So you can just have a look through. If you have, just use the same process and just go back in again and just sew a bit closer to the pom-poms, and that will then make sure that they're all sitting nicely for you and just not caught. Got another one that's maybe, oh, just I think I can just ease that out a little bit. Where's my quick unpick? Just ease those fibres out a little bit. That's it. Wasn't very squished, that one wasn't. They're quite soft, so they will. Some of them might sort of just get a little bit caught in, but you can, you now know how to undo them. Just put this back out the way. So what I'm going to do next, after all of that, is start to match up these side seams here. So because we don't need to do anything else on the inside, so I'm just going to, we've got our tailor's tacks anyway, and I'm just, where those edges were folded before, I'm just lining them one on top of each other, looking for pins, which I can't see, over there. Pins have got quarter pom-poms. So I'm just going to smooth those two, because those are the pressed edges, if you remember. I mean, yours might be tacked down, and if they are, then great. Just line those up so that's sitting nicely. And then on the other side as well, line this one up so your seam allowances are pushed into the inside. You can just see that little bit just there. You just see that one's just got, so on this one, look, I've just not sewn that one just down far enough, so when I start I'm going to sew that one a little bit further down, because these bits we'll just do by hand now. I mean, you could put it in the machine and just sew down and around if you want, but it'll be much neater, I think, if we do that bit by hand. So I'm going to go for the nicer finish and sew it by hand. So just make sure these ones line up too. They do. And also we need to press this really before we actually sew it together. And I'll show you how to get rid of the tailor's tacks as well, especially if they've got caught in your stitching, because there's a knack to that as well, a little trick that we can use for that. So you just want these arm slits just to sit really nicely and flat, so you don't really want to see any of the contrast colour on the outside, so when it's together you want it just to look like it's not really there, but the slit is there. And the other thing that we can do is take this to the ironing board as well and just give it a press, and that will just make sure that this lining is just all sitting all nice and flat. So remember at the beginning when I said about your lining needing to stay flat, that's why you wanting to have no puckers on the outside here, and your seam allowance as well, you wanted that to be even. And that's when you're sewing and you're using your seam allowance, that's what affects, because if you'd got a pucker in the seam here, you'd be able to see it. But by using that tip that I said before, whereas if you think there's a pucker going to be forming, take it to a seam you've already got and just take the wedge out. It just means that you'll then just neaten that up and you won't have the pucker in your panel of your fabric. You've lost it in the seam here, and that will make it much neater for you. But you want it to sort of sit, so I mean it's almost a reversible cape in actual fact, isn't it? Because the lining's pretty. And you could have it the red way round if you wanted to, with the corduroy lining, or when we've finished it off you'll be able to wear it that way as well. And we've still got to put the little hook and eye closure on there for the neck of it, haven't we? But otherwise that's sitting really quite nicely. And again with the ears, we're going to do the same thing with those ear openings. Just going to find those, make sure they're nice and lying flat, and then just put a pin in to hold it together, and then we're going to just do a ladder stitch just to hold that together as well. So just line those up. And also it does mean that if you've got a character that doesn't have ears that stick out the top like this, that you don't have to sew those holes up. You can use it interchangeably, can't you, because they're so well hidden, especially with this print of this fabric. But you don't have to hide them. Right, so let's get on with some hand sewing then, folks, shall we? And just tuck that in there. Make sure it's lined up as much as we can. This is where accuracy of sewing to your marks is really important, because you don't want a one ear hole here and another one on the lining further down. Just make sure they lie nice and flat when you sew them, and that should be fine. Okay. I think I'm happy with that. Yes, let's do some hand stitching, and then we'll take it and press it first. Maybe no, I'll do the hand stitching first and then I'll press it afterwards, I think. But it's coming on, it's looking nice, isn't it? Really good. Okay, bear with me 1 second. So I've got my glasses on now because we're doing some very close work. I've got a single thread, single strand of thread that I've just got sewing with single as well. And what I'm going to do as first stitch is I'm going to just go in and find my way into that seam allowance. So I'm going to fold this seam allowance back because I want to bury my thread under the seam allowance, so the knot is actually inside the work. And then I can just use my needle just to flick that needle down, that thread down. Now I'm sewing with red thread because I think that the white would be more noticeable on the red than the red thread will be on the white, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to take a little stitch of the white just there, and then I'm just going to go back in again and just take a little bit out of here. And the fibres of the corduroy are just going to hide those stitches, I think. Just making sure I get some of the actual fabric and not probably could have done with a thinner needle really, but oops, it's come unthreaded. Hold on 1 second. So basically I'm just taking a little stitch off the edge of the lining and then a little stitch off the edge of the the outer fabric, and just literally just attaching those two together. You can see little red stitches, but I think once it's on I don't think you'll be able to see it. Make them neat enough. And so I'm just going to keep on doing this all the way around both arm openings and both ear openings. And then it'll be time to take out the tailor. I could move that pin now. And then it'll be time to take out the tailor's tacks, because we've finished with all of those now, and I'll show you how I do those. I mean, yes, you can just pull them, but sometimes you get one or two that are stuck. So I'll just show you what to do if you get one or two that are stuck. Okay. I'm just going to go off and do this and I'll come back to you. So just before we declare this cape finished, what I've just sewn around the ear hole edges, so just attach that in, and I've just sewn the arm holes as well. Now 1 or 2 of these threads have just got caught, and I said to you I'd tell you, because most of them will just pull straight out, but what I do is if you get one edge of it and you snip it close to your lining. Oops, can't get hold of it. What that does, it just releases those fibres so that then you'll be able to just pull gently and it'll just pull straight out. She says, and it doesn't. That's because it's a different one. Okay, so there's another one that's just got caught in the fibres. So if we just then snip that one quite close to where it is and then give it a pull, it just comes straight out. So don't be giving them a great big tugs like this one as well, or you can just snip it off just flush with the fabric. I mean, obviously you don't always want to have the black sticking out there, but you just go round and just take them off. But I got a few, so I just thought I'd show you how I get those out. And just use the edge of your snips just to get any threads that are just caught, and just pull those out. I think this fabric's going to hold on to, and there's another one here as well where it was just got caught in the stitches, so again just snip it off close to the edges. It's a different one. Pull that one off. Then we can see a little bit of white thread in there. I'll just use the edge of the snips or a quick unpick point. And just help those fibres just coming out. Sometimes it just releases them and gets them out. And it depends how finicky you are as to which bits you want to get out and which bits you're happy to leave. But that just shows you how to get those little tailor's tacks out. But other than that, I think we're about ready. So let me just grab a Luna to try this on, and we'll see what she looks like in it. And here we have Luna in her finished cape. So she's got a t-shirt. She isn't pestering me now for a dress to go underneath it, I have to admit. But for now, there we go. So we've got lovely holes for her ears to go out of. We've got the lovely pom-pom trim, the slits for her arms to come out of, and that lining sitting really nicely against the main fabric. And there's the back of the hood, is all sitting all nicely with no puckers. And that trim is just sitting all nicely round the back here. Probably could just do maybe just a little bit of a press more, but as we can see, that's sitting really nicely. The last thing that I did do was just sew a hook and eye on her neck. Now I've just made it a little bit more difficult for myself, because what I decided was that the hood, the cape is so nicely finished that if you choose the right fabrics, it's actually reversible. So if I just turn this around the other way, then I did something special with the sewing the hook and eye on at the neckline. Pop your ears through, Luna. And you can tell me in the comments if you like which way you prefer, whether you like the corduroy pattern side out, the white side out, or whether you like this red side out more. I think one's a little bit more Christmassy and one's perhaps a little bit more wintry. Now with the hook and eye, what I've done is where I sewed it on, I didn't want you to be able to see it from the inside, so I've sewn, you can see just there, I've sewn a button on either side of the hook and eye. So the hook and eye is actually hidden underneath the buttons, so you can't see it from one side, but then on this side it just looks like you've got buttons, which actually makes it then reversible for her. So let me just turn the camera around and I'll have a chat with you. So I hope you've enjoyed sewing Luna's winter cape with me today. I hope that you feel that it's something that you could tackle, especially with sewing with this trim as well, the pom-pom trim, and also working with this lining to make sure that it sits flat. Hopefully I've given you a few tips and tricks that'll make you feel confident and inspired to have a go. I think it's a beautiful addition to her wardrobe, whatever fabric you decide to choose for yourself, and whatever trim, or just skip the trim if you don't want the trim on it. Whatever you want to do, you can make it your own. So happy stitching, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, then please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and if you also hit the notification bell, then you'll get an email or a notification whenever I've uploaded a new video. So there will be more, because I want to do some more of these, some more items before Christmas. The other thing is that I did have a think was how nice would it be if this was full length and had a nice big bow at the front and maybe a bit of a fur trim round it. So I'm going to, I think there'll be a follow-up video to this one, which will then show you how to elongate the pattern, and then the construction will still be the same, but that pattern changing might be new for some people, and then obviously we can talk about how to sew the ribbon in so that we can have a nice bow at her neck as well. So just a bit of an idea to tweak on the pattern that came to me while I was stitching her, but hopefully you've enjoyed watching and you've enjoyed sewing along. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.